will now move on to our Finance Committee report. That concludes public comment. Committee Chair Norton, are you ready? Yes. The floor is yours.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. So this is reporting out from our August 4th committee meeting. The first item is agenda item number 3.4, which is R277484, an amendment to the data standards rule. The motion for the board is that the committee moves that the board approve R277-484 data standards draft 2 on second and final reading.
Is there a second? Oh, yeah, we don't need a second. All in favor? The motion is, I was just going to restate the motion. The motion is that the board approve R277-484 data standards draft 2 on second and final reading. We have a few lights. Member Bogus.
Thank you, ma'am. I don't know who to direct this to, and I recall discussing this in committee. I just didn't catch this at the time. On line 19 and number 3B, it says the purpose of this rule is to, and in 3B line 19, it says support the provision of equal opportunity for students. And on its face, I think that sounds wonderful, but I have to ask this board the question, are we truly supporting equal opportunity for students when those who object to intrusive data collection have to leave public education in order to have their equal opportunity honored?
Is that a question directed to staff?
Well, perhaps, yes, because I don't think that we have equal opportunity when we have parents who are adamantly opposed to data collection. I have a constituent who cannot even enroll her child in dual enrollment because she's required to accept a K-12 data thing and she doesn't want to do it. So are we really championing equal opportunity when people have to leave public ed altogether to gain access to opportunities that fit within their conscience?
That feels like a rhetorical question. I'm not sure that anyone could answer that. That feels like a comment.
Well, I would offer that it's not a comment, it's a genuine question. And I'm wondering if there's a way to amend this rule to ensure that we have equal access.
Do you have an amendment then?
Sure, I would amend that anything can be done on paper by parental request. Right on line 19. I would move to amend line 19 to read that we support the provision of equal opportunity for students to include paper options in all things.
Is there a second to that motion? Okay. Staff, are you, I know there was some tech issues. Are you back up and ready to take that amendment for the screen? Okay. You're in there? Okay. Can you? Great, thank you.
So, Chair,
in the
Vice Chair Earl, I'm sorry, I believe I stated that wrong. Could I restate it?
Oh, sure.
I would move to amend line 19 to read that we support the provision of equal opportunity for students so that data collection is opt-in only.
And is that, does your second still stand? Okay. Deputy Superintendent Stallings?
Thank you.
Go for,
Thank you. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. I just want to clarify that I think that line is the purpose statement in the rule. It's actually not the body of the rule, but I could be wrong. So if you wanted to actually amend the content of the rule, it needs to be lower in, because that first section, it's kind of similar to like the highlighted provisions
Yeah.
in a bill. So we'd need to find a place lower below.
Could you then point me to the place where we're going to be able to provide equal opportunity in the body of that rule?
I agree with you.
Thank you, Superintendent Stallings.
If I may, Chair. Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practice. It's good to be with you this morning. This rule is more about reports that LEAs are filing and deadlines that LEAs have to meet for the state board. When you're talking about parents opting in or opting out from data collection, that kind of thing, I think R27747 is our student data privacy rule. And I think that would be where that subject matter would normally be addressed.
Member, hit your button. There you go.
And I believe we are working on that one. I would still move to amend the thing. I think it's important that we genuinely, if we're going to say equal access, we need to mean equal access. And so I would ask that the amendment stand, that it doesn't substantially change the body of the rule. I get that, I understand it. But I do think that if we're going to state equal access, we need to mean it for all students. All means all, including parents who are not on board with that. So I would move the amendment. Thank you. And thank you, Chair Rasmussen, or Mr. Rasmussen and Superintendent Stallings.
All right, so that amendment is on the floor. It has been seconded. Member Klein, you had a second. Did you have a comment too? Okay.
My comment would be just that I fully support this. I've heard from many constituents and parents from around the state that are also very concerned. They were never asked if they wanted schools to go to a computer-based system or to a data collection-centric system that takes out a lot of the human element and is dehumanizing and difficult for many students who just learn better with manipulatives, with paper and pencil and books, and that don't want to be tracked and don't want computer adaptive functions to move their child in a certain direction according to the algorithms of a computer system. And so I would fully support putting in provisions that protect a parent or honor a parent's right to opt out of all data collection systems for their child and be able to learn using non-tech instruments within the school, minus any, and also without any types of surveillance and tracking on the child.
Member Lear?
I'm sorry, I had a different
Okay.
question.
Member Davis? Oop, I just deleted you.
Yeah, thanks. Just checking on legalities. I mean, can we keep all the laws we're required to keep if we don't have records of kids in our systems? I just want to see where we're going with this, because I just concern about, like, text alerts, fire drills, lockdowns, safety issues. Can we account if there's papers? Just someone let us know if it's legal or not, please.
Adding this to the purpose section of 484 would have no effect on any other law. It would essentially just be sending a message that that's the board's feeling. It has no legal impact other than to just, it's kind of a message statement.
Okay. Hit your button.
So if LEAs take our message statement and start doing this, would it preclude other laws and things that we need to follow with communications in a variety of instances?
This would not change the law in any impact. All existing laws would still be in place. This would not have any legal effect on the LEAs.
Okay. I'm seeing puzzled looks in the back, so I don't know.
Meister Hart, just to clarify, I think in order to be cleanest as far as messaging and legally requiring LEAs to do something, the best course of action would be to amend 487, as Ben mentioned earlier, that this rule is not really the topic. This rule is really about LEA reporting requirements to USBE and doesn't speak to what the LEAs are collecting. So if we wanted to send a message or require LEAs to do something different about how they're informing parents about their rights or opting, allowing people to opt in or opt out, that really needs to be in another rule, which is R277, 487 or another. And we'd be happy to help prepare that rule draft or that amendment. I just think that what this would do is confuse some who may look at this and wonder what the legal impact is, and you'd almost need an attorney to say, oh, this is a purpose statement, not legally binding. So I think we've shared our recommendation is to do that in a different rule.
Would the maker of that amendment take that under consideration and be willing to bring that back for the appropriate rule? Member Bacchus?
So we are actually already working on, with staff, we are working on 484. I think it should be put in here. I think it should be overt in here that the board supports this. I think we can put it in both places. I understand that perhaps 484 is better, but I think it needs to be an overt statement that all means all, and that we're not discriminating.
Okay, I think people have commented. You've already commented. Do you need to make another comment? Okay.
So, Mike, I just have a question for Mr. Rasmussen. In your previous comment, what I took from that is that it is not tenable for parents to not have their students' data tracked or be in the systems in that way, in a trackable way, because of reports that are required of LEAs to make to the state. Would you say that that's correct? So that any rule change would actually not allow the student to opt out of data tracking systems?
That was not what I was trying to say. I was simply trying to, as Deputy Stallings added on, this is not the rule place to actually make that substantive change. Where this amendment has placed it here, it is just kind of messaging, and this rule doesn't talk about parent opt-in or for data
So
collection.
just to clarify my question, you said that districts would still be required to follow all the laws around these issues. So, and if the law requires that they report on every single child through those systems, then is it tenable to have parents opt their children out of those systems?
I'm not in a position to speak to whether that's tenable or not.
It sounds like the motion is on the floor to make adjustments to the purpose of this rule in the purpose space, and then what it sounds like is there's already work being done on the amendment that would actually change the actions. So I don't, Mr. Rasmussen is right, it's not, they wouldn't speak on whether it's tenable or not. That would come before us when we make those amendments to those rules. All right, seeing none, no other questions, please, let's take this to a vote. All in favor of the amendment, restating the amendment that the board amend R277484, line 19 to add at the end, so the data collection is opt-in only. Yeah, okay. It's a roll call vote. Oh, okay. All in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand and say aye, both. We have 1, 2, 3, Member Carey, Member Bogus, and Member Klein. All, and Member Green, I'm sorry, Member Green. 4 opposed, all, or 4 in favor, all opposed. Please raise your hand. No. Keep them up so we can confirm. 4 in favor, 10 opposed. That motion fails. Returning to the original motion that the board approve for R277-484 Data Standards Draft 2 on the second and final reading. Board Member Lear, you have a question?
I do have a question. On line 102, and this is a question I should have asked in advance, so I apologize. It's been a busy week, I think, for everyone. And I'm thinking the right person is maybe Deborah Jacobson, maybe Scott, one of you. So I'll just submit this to staff. It says an LEA shall submit teacher assignment and salary data to the board through Cactus or USIMS. Do you really mean to the board, or do you mean to the superintendent?
Staff, would someone,
Line 102.
and your mic is on.
Deputy Superintendent of Operations Scott Jones. So the answer, Madam Chair, to Board Member Lear's question is both. When we say in the rule, and Angie can help me with this, if the wording is superintendent, that implies staff, like your data and statistics team. The board, though, we mentioned the board because eventually you make decisions, or possibly make decisions on the data and the use of the data. If we don't get the data, it's difficult for us to, it would be very difficult for us to make decisions on, and the legislature, on funding levels, for instance. So it's intended to be both. Does that answer Board Member Lear's question, Madam Chair?
It does, thank you.
Thank you. Seeing none other, let's move to a vote. All in favor of approving R27484 Data Standards Draft 2 on second and final reading, please raise your hand and say yes. Any opposed? Member Klein is opposed. So that passes. Did you vote, Chair?
Yes.
Okay, that passes 14-1. Next item, Chair Norton. I'll get your mic. There you go.
Next item is item 3.5, which is R277-629, paid professional hours for educators. It's an amendment. The motion for the board is that the committee moves that the board approves R277-629, paid professional hours for educators, draft 1, on second and final reading.
The motion is the board approves R277-629 paid professional hours for educators, draft 1 on second and final reading. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Hold on. I saw him late. Member Klein?
Yeah, I just had some questions. This rule refers to 53F7203, where it lists student support. I'm just wondering if we have, and it looks like it adds a definition of student support educators to include librarians, instructional coaches, or other positions working in the school buildings, 50% or more. Do we have, they don't define student support in the code. So who else does it include besides those that we are trying to add, and or who doesn't it include besides those that are 50% or less in the schools? So I just would like kind of it all laid out there. What all it includes.
I
Who all
believe,
it includes.
yes, yeah. You got to hit your mic.
Thank you. Clearly I missed it. I exited the room for a short moment. What line are you on, Member Klein? Line 16, did I hear that correctly?
Yes. And I believe, Director?
Executive coordinator.
Executive Coordinator Height is here to answer that question for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Height. Hi, I'm Malia Height, Executive Coordinator of Educator Licensing. So we defined student support as somebody who is in contact with students more than 50% of their day.
Does, okay. Member Lear?
I had a question.
Hold on.
I had a question on the same line, probably not for Malia, probably more for the rule writer, and maybe Angie, maybe Scott. Anyway, my question is, and it's on line at line 16 and on line 27, where it says may include a librarian, and then line 27 says the LEA may prorate funds. And I'm just wondering if that leaves that to the discretion of the LEA, if that's the intent.
That was the intent, yes.
Thank
Great.
you.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
All right, seeing no further questions, please, let's vote. The motion is that the board approve R277, 629 paid professional hours for educators, draft 1 on second and final reading. All in favor, say aye. All opposed? Yeah, okay, Member Klein opposed, so that passes 14-1. Would you like to take it, or you want me to? Go ahead. Okay. Next item, Member Norton.
Next item is agenda item number 3.6, which is R277-701, Early College Programs Amendment. The motion before the board is that the committee moves that the board approves R277-701, Early College Programs, Draft 1, on second and final reading.
Okay, the motion on the floor is that the board approve R277-701, Early College Programs, Draft 1, on second and final reading. We've got a question from Member Klein.
Yes, on line 284, it requires disaggregating student, or disaggregating by student group. Given that these are for early college programs, I'm wondering why we are not disaggregating the data by proficiency, so that we are making sure we are allowing or promoting these classes for those that are prepared for them and not setting up students for failure. I know our laws say that, or our rules say that all students can participate in those, so that they're not excluded, but these classes were created for those higher level students that are capable of higher level work. And so do we encourage those that are at that higher level to participate in these classes? Or why are we disaggregating by student group? If students want to join and they're not prepared for it, why does it matter what their student group is, and what does that mean, student group?
Do we have a member of staff that, Deputy Norman, are you prepared to answer that?
I have one other question after that.
Okay, hold on, let's see if we can get is there?
Patty Norman, Deputy Superintendent of.
Okay, we may not have staff ready for that question. That may be something we need to pursue offline. They can speak generally to the, but just have her contact staff. Yeah, I know. Go ahead with your second question.
Okay, my second question is on the and I don't know what line this is, sorry. The removing of the the funding cap on the international baccalaureate programs. Where is it, was 100,000, it's now they're removing the cap, so does that mean unlimited amounts can go towards that? And what is the rationale for that?
I'm not sure we have staff ready for that question either. That one would we really need those questions to come early so we can make sure we have staff prepared to answer that. You do have I think we've got some people conferring. Thank you, staff. I know we're trying to get the questions to you earlier so that you're prepared. Answer what you can, but don't feel that, I mean, if you can, you can. If you can't, then if enough board members have questions about it, then we'll vote this down and it'll come back to us. Otherwise, we appreciate whatever input you can give us.
Thank you. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. I just wanted to remind first the board that we asked, it was a bill, one of our policy requests, to amend and strike that $100,000 from Utah code. So it used to be that the code had that ceiling of 100,000. And so just since this last session, we now have the ability to send out more, because that 100,000 had been static for years and years and years, and it's $100,000 total for all of the schools that were participating in IB. So now I would turn it over to Quinn Kellis to explain. It's formula based, and so it's not unlimited because we only have a certain amount of funding, and that portion would be determined through a formula.
Good morning, Vice Chair Hart, Superintendent, and members of the board. My name is Quinn Kellis. I supervise the early college team, and I've been asked to assist this morning. So the $100,000, as Angie said, was originally a cap on the amount that went to International Baccalaureate. It's part of a larger fund where, bless you, a portion was set aside for both advanced placement courses and International Baccalaureate courses, with only 100,000 max for International Baccalaureate. That cap, through legislation, was intended to be removed, which would bring the question to the board for a change in rule. What that 100,000, which is no longer a cap, but what that International Baccalaureate money is used for are two things. One, to pay for fees to participate, for schools to participate in the International Baccalaureate. So every school that participates in International Baccalaureate has to pay the IB people.
Organization.
Annual fees. And that can be very cumbersome for a school to want to participate in IB if they don't feel like they have the budget to do so. So part of that is fees for the school to participate in IB. The other is for students with financial difficulties who would struggle paying for the test fees, just like advanced placement. Students have to pay for the test. It's the same in International Baccalaureate, where there are annual tests that come with fees. The amount is, as Angie mentioned, is formula-based. So we can't give you an exact amount because it would depend on how many students take the test and how many schools participate.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so I will not be supporting this rule with that provision in there simply because of my research on the IB program. Just going to their website and seeing what they are promoting. And it's the typical DEI anti-racist Kendi version of the woke ideology that they're pushing very hard. And I don't believe that falls in line with
Okay.
what is acceptable in our schools.
Thanks. Member Bogus?
Thank you, ma'am. Sir, I don't know your name. I'm so sorry. Mr. Callis, thank you. I'm so sorry, Mr. Callis. I have One question I just want to confirm, and then I have a substantive question. IB is a UN program. Do I recall that correctly? I just want clarity on that in my mind so that I know that I'm on the same page as you.
I'm not sure that's accurate.
Could we find clarity on that? Because I want to make certain that in my brain I'm aligned. And then if I possibly, line 284, it says, Member Klein brought this up, but it says disaggregated by student group. And I went back and I looked for a definition for student group, and I'm genuinely not trying to be funny. What does that mean? Kids with pink pants, the age of 11, race? What are we actually talking about? Because I think if we're talking about race, we need to say disaggregated by race. Because student group could mean kids with yellow shoestrings. And I want to make certain that we have clarity in what we're asking and what we're doing here. So could you help me understand that?
Are you prepared to answer that question? Or let me turn your mic on.
Vice Chair Hart, if we need a list of what the demographic groups are that are included in this report, I can guess, but for this very specific one, I don't have that
Yeah.
answer.
Let's get.
Typically, they're aligned.
Yes, we'll ask that you get that information and forward it to our board members. Members, please remember to ask these questions prior so that they can come with the information that they need so that we can get them answered. Let's go ahead and move to, thank you, Mr. Kellis, thank you, Ms. Stallings. The motion is that the board approve. Where is it? Top of the page? Oh, thank you. R277419, People Accounting Draft 1 on second and final. Yeah, we've got it out of order. The board approve R277701, Early College Programs, Draft 1 on second and final reading. All in favor, say aye. We got a hand? Oh, Member Bogus.
I would move to substitute.
Okay, what is your substitute motion?
I would move that we send this back to committee until such time that we have clarity on what student groups means in line 284, and that we produce that with clarity for the public and for our LEAs. So I would move that we send it back to committee.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. Do we have a second? Member Klein seconds. Member Stallings.
Vice Chair Hart, I'm hesitant to speak in, but I do have an answer to that question.
Okay.
Which is, it's the state disaggregated groups, including gender, socioeconomics, ethnicity, SPED, students with disability, and English learners.
Okay. You can withdraw your motion. Hold on, let me get you on the microphone. There you go.
I would withdraw my motion and make a substitute motion that in the definitions at line, sorry, I'm on page like 6 or 7, I apologize. On line number, wherever it needs to be in the definitions, because I think it would be at or about line number 31 or 32, that we quote student groups and insert what Superintendent Stallings just read for clarity.
Do we have a second? That's a different motion.
I will second that if it's a separate motion from the main.
Yeah.
It is a separate
substitute.
motion from the main
It's a
motion, yes.
substitute. So that second stands.
So
Any-
Superintendent Stallings,
Oh.
it's an amendment, yes.
Okay. It would be an amendment to the motion, and we would be voting just on this. So your second stands.
Yeah,
Okay.
To add what Superintendent I apologize that I cannot speak without tripping on my tongue. To add the definition of student groups as read by Superintendent Stallings into the definitions. And thank you for allowing me to do that.
Wouldn't the motion be per,
At or about, it would be at or about 31 or 32 because definitions are typically done in alphabetical order. And ST comes before SU.
so you're,
Yes.
okay. So then. You can speak to the motion while we're,
Yeah, just while we're waiting, I just will speak against the motion just simply because the fact that we have this list of definitions that we refer to often. We just talked about the board, right? And we heard staff explain that to us, and it's quite well known. And so as we start adding definition after definition into these rules, they're going to be overrun by every small definition that's already in our database or whatever, right? And so I just speak against this motion. We know what group is, and it's already defined. Thank you.
okay, Member Lear.
I have a similar comment in that student groups is probably used in other rules, and so to define it as uniquely these groups, these types of groups in this rule, I think might be misleading for purposes of other rules. So I would also be opposed to this when there is a common understanding.
No, go ahead. So, we really need these motions to come early so that we can move on these. At this point, I'm not comfortable with an amendment that doesn't put it word for word, and this needs more clarity. I think the better course of action would be to vote on, to move to a vote. If it's voted down, it can go back and be brought back with appropriate motions that people want. I just, to put a motion in there, that's not the exact words, and I'm uncomfortable having our staff. That's the problem. We have 5 minutes to finish this committee. This is not what's going to be actually the verbiage put in this amendment, in this. Yes, you can call the question. All in favor of calling the question? Aye. Opposed to calling the question? We have 3 members opposed. Got them? All right, we've called the question. The question is that the board approve a definition of student group, as student group means the same term as defined in section R277920-5. All in favor, please say aye. Raise your hand, please. No, actually, this is the motion, so if you're not comfortable with this, then you wouldn't be comfortable with what's. I disagree. Sorry. Well, that's how you indicate that in a vote. Member, Deputy Stallings?
I just wanted to clarify what we did. We took the defined term of student group that we use in R277920, and it states, student groups means a group of 10 or more students who are economically disadvantaged, with disabilities, who are English learners, who are African American, who are American Indian, Asian, Hispanic, multiple races, Pacific Islander, or who are white. That is a term that we use right now for purposes of accountability, so it would be the same student group definition that we use consistently, if that makes sense. So that's why we did that, so that we'd have the same definition of student group that we generally use every time we
And
look
a-
at like accountability data, et cetera.
And a clarifying question is that if we wanted to change those groups, we would change it in that, and we wouldn't have to change it in every place.
Correct.
Okay. All right, we are to the, the question's been called, and the amendment failed? No, we didn't vote on the amendment yet. The call the question will pass. Right. All right, so the motion on the floor is that the board add a definition of student group as student group means the same as the term is defined in section R277 920-5. All in favor? 3, Member Klein, Member Green, and Member Bogus. All opposed? That fails 12-3. We're back to the original motion. The original motion is that the board approve R277-701 early college programs, draft 1 on second and final reading. All in favor? All opposed? We've got 3, Member Bogus, Member Green, and Member Klein. That motion passes 12-3. All right. Art, hold on, let me get your mic hot. There you go.
Great. This is agenda item 3.7. It's R277-439, the Prevention Block Grant Program, which is new. The motion before the board is that the committee moves that the board approves R277-439, Prevention Block Grant Program Draft 2 on second and final reading.
Okay, Member Bogus.
I apologize, that was for the last one.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, the motion on the floor is that the board approve R277-439, Prevention Block Grant Program, Draft 2 on the second and final reading. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? 3 opposed, Member Klein, Member Green, Member Bogus. That passes. You got it? Okay. That passes 12-3. All right. Next, Member Norton, Chair Norton.
Agenda item 3.8, which is the LEA compliance with mental health screener requirements. Excuse me, there is no motion for the board on that one. Let's move down to 3.10, the voted and board analysis and recommendation. The motion for the board here is that the committee moves that the board approves the voted and board work group recommendation and directs staff to 1, consolidate voted and board calculations into a single spreadsheet tab, and 2, create a funding policy request to A, consolidate state funding allocations from 6 to 2, and B, base program calculations on a 2-year prior tax rates and collections.
That, go for it.
Okay, I have maybe a clarifying question. When it comes to the, are we adding to that? Is there, I think there was an amendment or something to that. I'll wait and speak to that in just a minute. Is there someone?
Seeing none, you would, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Deputy Superintendent of Operations Scott Jones, we did put an amendment. I think it's on Angie's screen, because there's an additional, if the board chooses to support the recommendations of the work group, and Madam Chair, if I may remind the board that the work group consisted of representation from the districts, business administrators, so this recommendation is not unilaterally being done by USB staff. It was agreed to by the representatives of the work group, which did include business administrators from the district. If the board chooses to, because we always follow the direction of the board, adopt the recommendation of the work group, then we would also recommend that in order to hold and of course, this would have to go to the legislature, all that process too. However, we also would like to recommend that there be a hold harmless where the board could direct us as staff, we always follow the direction of the board, to work on a request for funding for one-time money for $66 million to cover the 2-year transition period. Should the board direct this and the legislature support it, does that help with the motion, ma'am?
Yes. Oh, it's okay.
No, I did, ma'am.
Would you please read the amendment into, or do we need to? Someone needs to make it. Yeah. Will you make the amendment, please? Hold on, let's get you live.
Yeah.
There you go.
I move that we amend the motion to read that the board add a subsection to 2C to the funding policy request to include the following. C, that provides $66 million of one-time funding so that districts are held harmless from any loss of funds due to changes in the funding policy related to the voted and board program. And do I read the in context? Oh, I don't need that. That's all I
Nope,
needed.
that's all you need. We would need a second. Okay, Member Lear seconds. We have a, yes. Yes.
So every time that, I'll just speak for myself, that I make a policy request in a motion, I am told that I have to hold it until the appropriate agenda item. So I would make a motion that we do this at the appropriate time. Otherwise, we allow policy requests at all times by all members, and we be fair and sporting in our application of that. So if it's allowed, let's allow it for everything, and if it's not allowed and it has to be done under certain agenda items, then let's do it then.
Hold on, this is a little bit different.
This is the
Go
agenda
ahead.
item.
This is the agenda. It's,
And I understand that, but I have made multiple policy requests on agenda items as they come forward, and I have been denied the ability to make a motion with a policy request at that time, and it was even suspended a month into a different meeting. So if we're gonna allow policy requests on agenda items, we need to allow them all the time for every board member, or we put them on the agenda item under policy requests. I don't care what the leadership team chooses, we just need to be fair, sporting, and consistent in the application of those policies.
so clarification, Committee Chair Norton, was the original motion passed out of committee without this piece?
We discussed it. It was not included in the original motion, am I correct? This is to
Then I'm
clarify.
wondering if the first piece was never voted on, then this becomes the motion. The first motion. This isn't an amendment if it wasn't voted on. If it was voted on, it was an amendment.
Well, it's an amendment to the motion that we did.
Did you vote on it in
We
committee?
voted on this item, which was the voted and board analysis with the recommendations.
Okay,
And we presented that motion, just a minute
Okay.
ago I presented it. And this is then an addition
in
onto
addition.
that motion.
Okay. Member, or Deputy Super, did you have a comment? Hold on, let me get you live. I have.
Right, so Madam Chair, the motion was made, it was voted on and passed out by the Finance Committee. Board Member Bogus, I believe, actually made the motion to send it to the board. All we're asking for, because please recall, board members, that we offered additional training and/or information, virtually to all the board members so that we could get to the understanding of why there would be why we would recommend that there be $66 million asked for, right? Because we understand the complexity of this situation. We understand the complexity of the voted and board. Yes, it's a policy change, but more, what we're actually asking to amend today is a funding request, or, your direction to have us work on a funding request. So, I mean, it's just clarity. I don't disagree with Board Member Bogus at all. I see what her point is too, but we just, that was the process, and it was agreed that staff would offer discussions or, a forum, if you will, for virtual participation by board members to better understand the voted in board. So thank you, ma'am.
And can I add on to that?
Yes.
In our committee meeting, this information was presented there as well. It was part of the presentation that we had in committee, so we knew in committee that this was part of it. We've just included it as on to the rest of the policy, the rest
Okay.
of the motion.
Member Bogus, you raise an interesting point, very much. I think we need to take that under consideration. I think that right now, it is appropriate for this, conversation did occur prior to this meeting, and people were able to get their questions answered. I think that means that this is an appropriate time to be able to take or not take this action. But you do raise a very good point, and leadership will take it under consideration. I think the difference that I see is that the board has seen this, if you watch the committee or if you participated in the optional training, you were able to ask questions and learn about what's being presented. And that is why motions or policy asks that are brought up in board meeting are asked to come back so that everybody has an opportunity for discovery. Everybody had an opportunity for discovery on this, so let's move forward. Now, if you're uncomfortable with it, board members, please just vote it down so it can go back to committee and be considered with more time. So, yes, Member Earl, Vice Chair Earl.
So this speaks to my question, and maybe it goes along with Board Member Bogus's question just a little bit, but if we voted yes for this, I'm trying to understand the prioritization. Does that now become a priority for the board? And I see the two as separate. We may be indicating the original motion, right? But when we add the funding component to it, then to me, it adds a complexity of, if we vote for this, does that automatically go into we're going to support this on our funding when we haven't even gotten to the funding prioritization that we normally do? So I guess that's a question I'm having. Does this skip that and automatically go into a support for that funding for the 66 million, or do we still have that prioritization? I guess I'm just not clear on that.
I assume it goes on the list and we prioritize it when it's time to prioritize. It just goes to the list. It doesn't say that, it's, the way it's worded says to add a funding policy request. And those requests come to the board. That's not, it's just adding it to the list so that it's there when we consider it.
Okay, so I would agree with Board Member Bogus in that needs to come during the funding time and associated with this, that the policy needs to be separate from that just because we have been doing the funding at a different location or a different time on our agenda. Not that we don't do it, I'm just thinking because that is, so.
My question would be to staff, if we don't move on this now, is there enough time to get it on the list for consideration later? Because it's tomorrow, and I'm not sure there's any other way to get it on the list. But Deputy Jones? Oh, it's today?
So, Madam Chair, members of the board, as Vice Chair Earl articulated, later on the agenda is the legislative request agenda item / process. what this is asking, so whether this occurs here or in that is fine, because we're on a good timeline, because recall that you still have your October meeting to finalize everything before the mandatory by law submission to the governor's office. So whether you do this motion here or not, what we're trying to do is to ensure that we are recognizing as staff the intent that everything is board directed when requests for funding take place. What it would do is if you direct us to work on a request for funding for 66 million of one-time money to support this recommendation, it would give staff time to do that request for funding between your meeting here in September and your final meeting for your recommendations, right, in accordance with the Budgetary Procedures Act in October. That's all we're doing. We're trying to honor direction of the board and your timeline, but then also meet the requirements of the Budgetary Procedures Act. And we feel strongly that if you choose to direct us to, build a request for funding for 66 million, either here or in that agenda item later, we certainly can do that. We're still on a good timeline. It does mean that, October would be your only, it would be the meeting for you to look at the request for funding that staff put together. Does that help, Madam Chair?
Yes, it
Okay.
does. Member Wood? No, I just.
Thank you. I did attend the extra training, and it seemed to me that the conversation was a 33 million for 2 years. We didn't discuss it as a 66 million. So my question is, are we asking for the full 66 million now, and that will be divvied out for 2 years? Is that why we've changed the terminology that we're using?
Deputy.
Yes, so process-wise, and, in the 8 years I've been here, the legislative fiscal analysts ask us to make, or you, the board, to make requests for funding on a one fiscal year basis, right? So when we get to the legislative session in '24, we'll be making requests for funding in '25. We can make requests for funding that we know would likely go over a number of years, right? Because typically, when they award us either one-time or ongoing money, it's that term non-lapsing, right? So if they award us or appropriate us one-time money in the amount of 66 million, and we use 33 million in fiscal year 25, we just report to the legislature that we intend to use the other half in FY 26. And we would put that in the request for funding so it's very clear that it would overlap 2 fiscal years in order to, as we intended and recommended, hold LEAs harmless should support come from you, from the board on the recommendations, and then eventually the legislature as well, at your direction. So, Madam Chair, did I answer Board Member Wood's question?
Board Member Wood, are you? Okay. Board Member Davis?
Yeah. I'm going to move to postpone this to one motion to item 12.1, please, and I'd like to speak to the motion briefly.
If there's a second? There's a second from Member Green. Go ahead and speak to your motion.
Okay, thank you. I think that, it's okay to keep all of the funding requests in legislative funding, but we have things like this that do involve these situations that come out of committee all the time, and it's less a matter of keeping all of them together in one place than it is a matter of agendizing appropriately, as we move forward. So I think this is okay coming out of committee, but since we all had a big conversation about trying to end each section on time and end today on time,
We're trying.
I move that we postpone this to item 12.1 just for the sake of time.
Thank you. And my point is, if we're going to end up bringing it back and having the conversation again, it seems like it's taking more time. But that motion, that's fair, and I understand that. I think the concern is that board members had the opportunity, whether they took it or not, to get their questions answered about every item that comes before our board. And in this case, there was not only a meeting, but an opportunity to ask questions. So the motion's been made and seconded. Member Bogus, is your light still on? Because it's. Oh, okay, go ahead.
So the point of clarification is that I don't believe the meeting that board members were invited to was ever made available to the public. And so that part of the conversation should be able to be seen by the public. So if it has not yet been, maybe it should be posted. But then secondly, and it's semantics, and I really like Superintendent Jones, but Member Davis made that motion coming out of committee. It is semantics, just for clarity. And my issue is not so much with the motion itself, it's with its placement. And I think that we have to be clear and consistent as we operate. Otherwise, we have no standards but double standards. And we need to have uniformity in our standards. So that is my issue with the motion, not the motion itself. Thank you.
Thank you. The motion before the, Member Straight, you got, okay. The motion before the board is that the board postpone the action on this item to item 12.1 later in the day. Motion has been made and seconded. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? No. Okay, we're going to take a roll call vote, please. Member Bogus? Yes. Member Booth? Member Klein? Yes. Member Davis? Yes. Vice Chair Earl? Member Green? Yes. Member Hymas? No. Member Carey? Yes. Member Lear? No. Member Norton? No. Member Reel? No. Member Straight? No. Member Wood? Yes. Member Moss?
Yes.
And I am a yes. That motion passes 10-5. That item has been moved to 12.1 later today. And that was a postponement. So now we go. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm just hoping to get it on the screen. Well, I'll restate it. The motion on the floor is that the board approves the voted and board work group recommendation and direct staff to 1, consolidate voted and board calculations into a single spreadsheet tab, 2, create a funding policy request, to A, consolidate state funding allocations from 6 to 2, and B, base program calculations on a 2-year prior tax rate and collections. All in favor? Say aye. Aye. All opposed? Member, you're opposed? Member Green is opposed, so that passes 14-1. Moving on. Chair Norton?
Yes, this is item 3.11, the intensive service program sunset recommendations. And the motion is that the committee moves that the board does not oppose the repeal of 53F-2-420.
Okay, the motion on the floor is that the board does not approve the repeal of 53F-2-420. Member Klein?
Yeah, just a question, trying to understand a little better. If we vote to have this sunset, it says it wouldn't affect what we do at our level. Would it expand our ability to do more? Whereas the code limited what we can do?
Do we have a member of staff that could answer? It's interesting wording on that.
That's what I was saying.
Motion. So could we get some clarity? Deputy Stallings? I gotta mute me.
Thank you, Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent Policy. And I was not in the committee when they had this discussion. The original staff recommendation was to say that the board supported sunset of the program, but the motion must have been changed during the Finance Committee. What this program is it was a pilot program, 3-year funding for intensive services, and it is currently up for its sunset, meaning that if nothing happens, the legislature does not pass a bill, the program is going to go away. The Education Interim Committee wanted a recommendation from the board on whether that sunset should be continued, whether the program should be reinstated. And it was the staff recommendation that the program be allowed to sunset because it's a small amount of dollars that creates a lot of burden, paperwork, et cetera. I don't know that I answered your question directly, Board Member Klein, but I wanted to provide that background about what the motion was about, is about a specific pilot program on intensive services. It's a fairly small dollar amount.
Member Klein, did that answer your question? I suppose what,
Do you need to talk?
it doesn't oppose the repeal, which means it's letting a pilot, the pilot was just maybe didn't do the things that we wanted it to do. And so we're not opposing the pilot. Yeah, do you want to clarify that? Or Member Earl?
Well, that's okay, I think. Do
So,
you have a clarifying question?
my question was, this was set up to be a pilot program, so it brought it in, now we're doing it, now the pilot program's going away, but we can still keep doing it. Did the code, based on what was the explanation that they have on the background, it just lessens the burden on us if we don't have the requirements of the pilot program. Right. My question is, without that code in place and us still doing it, are we now able, as on our level, to expand that program from the limited pilot program that it was?
No.
And so it becomes just an open,
The program no longer exists, correct?
But it says we're still doing it, even if this bill or this piece of code is allowed to sunset. It says it's not inhibiting our ability to continue doing it. But does it open it up for us to do it on a larger scale?
I understand the question. Deputy Stallings, would you like to respond? Hold on. Let me.
Thank you. And I apologize. Assistant Superintendent Voorhees may be able to answer the specifics better, but there's a state intensive services program and a federally funded intensive services program. So what the motion is right now is on the state-funded small pilot program. And I believe some of the background speaks to the fact that we already have an intensive services program that is funded through federal dollars that will continue and could be expanded. So legally, to your question, could the program be expanded? Yes, if there are dollars available. And so there are federal dollars available, which Assistant Superintendent Voorhees could speak to better than I could. She has more knowledge about the amounts, how that's being done, et cetera. If desired, if the board would like her to come up and speak to it.
Does that answer your question better? Yeah, okay, thank you. Member Davis, sorry.
Yeah. I just want to add a little bit of background to this. Prior to it being a pilot, it was not a pilot. There were federal dollars and there were state dollars appropriated for this. And the LEAs had to apply for the state dollars, and there were problems with the formula, and it was inequitable, and one was getting too much, more than the others, and it was a big brouhaha. And so, anyway, we should probably note, however, that there were only like 3+ million total with the federal dollars and the state dollars, where there was several $1 million of eligible requests requested from the LEAs to cover the costs of these students, some that could cost $100,000 with nursing and medical care and things like that. So the federal dollars that we have, if I understand correctly, will cover if a LEA gets a move-in that has some of these high needs. But they're not going to go necessarily, if I understand correctly, to help like kids in Jordan Valley School or Horizon School or Dan Peterson or any of these special schools that have so many of these high-cost students. I mean, we were sort of doomed to this fate when we put this into a pilot program. Because honestly, you can't do anything with $300,000 a year for 3 years. And so obviously the writing was on the wall, but I think the reason some of us supported it was because we were going to do a financial study through WestEd and surveying LEAs. And I think we thought it would be done by now. And it hasn't been. It's in progress. So we're trying to get more information, and schools have been surveyed, but we don't have all the data from WestEd. So, and also, I'm just going to put this out there, we really need to look at reducing our carry forward balances, and that's going to probably have to come in another policy issue through a committee, because that's been problematic as well. So as we wait for this information from WestEd, we figure out, LEAs are saying to us, we are subsidizing special ed like crazy, but the coding isn't quite right, and there are all these questions. So anyway, I just want to give a little bit of background that this doesn't mean that the needs go away for special education funding, and that may need to come later in self-contained funding or some other formula, but the program itself has had a long and storied and difficult past. Put it that way.
So can someone from the committee answer, was this worded this way because we were signaling that this intensive services pilot, it's fine for it to go away because of the problematic nature, but also signaling that our intensive services needs have not gone away, and we are going to still need to address that? Is that why this was worded this way? Chair Norton? Okay. Or maybe let's, never mind, I withdraw my question. I see the problem, though. Intensive services is still a need, and to sunset a program that we need funding for seems very difficult to do. So I think that may be where this is going, but that's my editorial. Member Lear.
And I would like an answer to your question. I think maybe Member Davis, who was on that committee, could give me more insight about, so having given us the background, are you okay with this being, your personal opinion about this, letting this go in an effort to have something long-term come about?
Member Davis, I'll allow that.
I'll respond with an amendment, actually. Okay. I think I'd like to amend the motion to say that board direct staff to let legislators know that the intensive services funding needs are still very much present, but because the program has been problematic, woefully underfunded, but you don't need to put that part in, but problematic, that we can sunset this at this time, but make very clear that the needs are very real still.
Can you state that in form of a motion, please?
I move that we amend this motion to request that staff communicate to legislators that the intensive services needs are very much still in effect, but the program parameters have been problematic and can be sunsetted at this time.
Okay, the motion, can you get that up on the?
It's really long.
That would be, well, she's actually just adding the first part. She's still keeping the body. The board supports sunset, however, the need still exists. And Member Lear seconded that. Member Davis, is that an accurate representation of your motion?
Yes, and I really trust our staff to go back and say, give all the numbers. How much was requested? How many were legitimate requests turned away, and why we still have a need, but it may need to be done differently in the future.
Okay, this motion's been made. Just to clarify why this one would be appropriate is because this conversation, the question on the original motion, there's no way that this could have been asked ahead of time in this body. That's why this motion is appropriate here, while other motions should be made ahead of time. So we have a motion and a second. We've got, Member Klein, is it about this one? Okay. Member Klein.
Okay, I'm just looking for a definition on intensive services. And if somebody has a definition somewhere, I don't see it.
There,
Okay, Special Education Intensive Services Fund. It defines the fund, but not what the intensive services are. And I'm wondering if that includes behavioral as well as like mental health as it related to MTSS. And is it more than just special ed students?
can someone pull up the definition? That one should be readily easy to
Tier 3.
find.
Tier 3 on the MTSS is intensive services, but that includes more than special ed. So where's the line between MTSS and SPED? Or is it all blurred together?
Okay, while staff is looking up that definition, oh, you got it already? Okay.
Wouldn't the line be IEP? A child with an individualized education program would be a child that would qualify for intensive services. Other children do not qualify
Correct.
for intensive services or the funding because they don't have an IEP. Did I inaccurately speak on that?
No, that would be accurate.
Check with Leah. Is that accurate?
Leah was shaking her. Deputy Voorhees is shaking her head, yes. She's wanting to know what the definition of intensive services is. But it would not be related to MTSS in general. The MTSS is a general ed term.
So is it stated somewhere that IEP is the defining characteristic for intensive services?
Special education. It-
But it doesn't say that all the way through, does it? On the motion that we're doing just says intensive.
Right, but in the definition of this rule, it says that's the definition of intensive services. Okay, friendly amendment. Let's just go ahead and put that in. Deputy Stallings? Yeah,
Thank you. I just wanted to share, there's not a definition where it says intensive services means. However, on page 255 of the Special Education Rules Manual, which I didn't have time to send to Greg so he could link to it, but it does state on page 255, this is essentially the allowable use of the funds. Number 1, must be used for direct costs attributable to the cost of implementing IEPs for students with disabilities. 2, cost of services to a student with a disability must be in excess of 3 times the annual average per pupil expenditure as calculated by USBE Financial Operations. And 3, costs must meet the eligibility requirements outlined in Board Rule R277752. So although there's not a defined term, it clearly states it has to be related to a student with a disability who has an IEP and whose services cost more than 3 times the annual average per pupil expenditure. So those are the only groups of students who could be supported by those funds. 255 at the bottom. I can send that if you would like.
yeah. Member Straight?
Yes, thank you. As a member of that committee, I speak in favor of the motion that's currently before us. I think it more clearly represents what I thought I was voting for with the original motion, so I support it. Thank you.
All right, I see no other. Oh, yes, while you were conferring with Mr. Cannell, we were going to put, it was a friendly amendment. Well, actually, Member Davis just changed her motion to say special education, right, as a modifier to intensive services. There you go. And then it's in line with the special education manual. That works? Okay, yeah. All right, so the motion is the board directs staff. Oh, Chair Moss, but your name doesn't show up here. Go ahead, Chair Moss.
Sorry, just quick point of clarification. I think I would take it as a given that we want to make clear that we are not proposing a specific funding request for intensive services, but rather expressing that the need has not gone away. And I raise that just for clarity. At some point, we're going to be pitching our top 10, and sometimes confusion arises where they think, oh, you guys wanted intensive services too. I understand the intent because we had discussions when this came up, and there was an attempt to keep a toehold here. And so I assume that's consistent with the motion itself. Just wanted to make that clear so that the legislature doesn't get the wrong intent as we point this out to them.
To logistics. Yes, I appreciated Representative Moss for helping us to keep this alive in hopes we could have that funding study done by now, but it didn't.
Member Klein.
So is the federal program not enough? Is it woefully inadequate? Is that what this is all about? And so we're trying to figure out another way to take care of the need?
I believe we tried to take care of it, but the program that we put in place was onerous and had very little money, and it is more advantageous to rely on those federal dollars rather than rely on federal and state, or legislature.
Was this
Yes.
an attempt by the legislature to not have us be dependent on the federal program and to eventually replace it?
I
Or
don't-
Is it just a supplement? Was it
Yeah.
just a supplement?
I don't, and none of us could speak for the legislature on that one, I don't think. Yeah, I think your guess is as good as mine. Okay, the motion is that the board directs staff to communicate to legislators that special education intensive services needs are still present, but because the specific program requirements related to the intensive services pilot program are problematic, the board supports a sunset of the program. All in favor? Oh. Requirements to logistics in the motion. And Member Lear, you seconded it. I'm assuming you're still okay with it? Okay, thank you. With that change, all in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, that's unanimous. And I believe, oh, we've got one more item. Committee Chair Norton. Oh, we need to, no, that was the vote. That was the amendment. I'm sorry, folks. We now have. Oh, you know what? You're right, but. Let's just take another vote. Yeah, let's just go ahead and vote. All right, we're now voting on the final motion. The board directs staff to communicate to legislators that special education intensive services needs are still present, but because the specific program logistics. No, this is now the motion. Well. Right, but then when we wordsmithed it, yeah, we're just voting on a substitute motion. The board directs staff to communicate to legislators that special education intensive services needs are still present, but because the specific program logistics related to the intensive services pilot program are problematic, the board supports a sunset of the program. All in favor? All opposed? That motion still passes. Sure. Member Klein.
The special ed manual that was referenced, is that incorporated by reference in one of our rules? Do you know which rule?
Is incorporated by reference into R277750, and I will link that 750 in the email I'm about to send as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, committee chair.
last item. 3.12, the Regional Education Service Agency, or RESA, funding request for early learning instructional coaching. The motion before the board is that the committee moves that the board approves one-time funds for from the tax delay balances in the amount of $267,000 for the purpose of the SESC RESA hiring or retaining 2 literacy coaches for SFY 24.
The motion as stated is on the floor. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Member Klein opposed. That passes 14-1. We are done with law and finance. Yeah, let's take a 5-minute break, no longer, please.
Take 5 and then prepare to complete lawn licensing in 40 minutes. 40 minutes. We can do this.